Today I'm going to show you a super quick way to get your Commonwealth ships from the new Dystopian Wars 2-player starter set Hunt for the Prometheus painted and into battle. I'm going to paint the resin Borodino ship in this tutorial just because it's the biggest and easiest to show on camera. However, I've used the exact same method across all of the Commonwealth ships, so you can use this method across your fleet. We start by priming the ship black. I'm sure I don't need to show you that part. Next, I sprayed the ship with lead belcher from Citadel with my airbrush. I did that for speed, but if you don't have an airbrush, you can use a spray can of lead belcher, or you can just use a heavy dry brush to cover the entire ship. Once you're done, it should look something like this. Next step is we take grey night steel and dry brush the entire model to give a bit of a silvery blue tint to the whole ship. For those that don't know what dry brushing is, I take a really cheap makeup brush from a dollar store, just dip the tip of the bristles into the lid of the paint, and then using a paper towel wipe off the excess paint and work it into the bristles. You're trying to use almost dry paint, hence the name, to wipe over the high spots of the design. Always wipe off more than you think, as it's easy to build up the colour transition with multiple passes. However, if you go too heavy, you'll need to paint the lead belcher back on to cover it. Just brush in circular motions, dragging the brush over the model, and when you're done, it should look a little bit like this. Next, we take Nuln Oil, which is a black wash, and using a large old brush, I cover the entire model. You want to keep the wash from pooling up heavily in areas by keeping it moving with the brush. You're trying to run the wash into the recesses to emphasise the details, whilst also taking some of the shine off the silver and making it look a little more old and weathered. If you find it's pooling too much, dry the brush on a paper towel and use a dry brush to wick away any excess. Leave it to completely dry and then we can move to the next step. Next up, I take Retributor armour and paint the crest on the bow of the ship, the stars on the main deck, along with a few details as you can see here. Remember to thin down your paint so that you don't fill in the details, especially on the smaller ships. Next, we use Necron Compound, which is a dry paint, and using a large flat brush, lightly dry brush the whole ship. Here we're trying to pick up on the very highest points of the sculpt to give an impression of shining metal without totally covering over the washed down steel of the ship. Just drag the brush in one direction, top to bottom, so that all the high spots are where the sunlight would hit the ship. Once you're done, it should look a little like this. Now we take Blood Angel's red contrast paint and we paint it over the gold areas like the stars, the shield on the front of the crest, and a few details around the ship. Painting the red contrast over the gold metallic paint gives it a real candy red effect and it looks great. Just be as neat as you can, and if you go over anywhere we'll tidy it up later, so don't worry about it too much right now. We're going to paint the main deck now, so I take Xandri dust, thin it down with some water and paint the deck boards on the ship. I'm trying to save the dark recesses between the boards that we filled with the black wash. However, we are going to cover this in the next step, so don't worry too much if you thin it a little too much and it runs into the gaps. Once you've done the deck, it should look like this. Now we're going to take another contrast paint, snakebite leather in this case, and paint it over all of the areas we just painted with the Xandri dust. This gives the deck a deeper wood effect and it'll help run into the gaps too. Try to be neat, but again, if you go over onto any of the silver areas, we'll be tidying it up later, so don't worry too much. There's not too much left to do now and the ship is starting to look great. Now we take Balthazar gold and we paint up any pipework on the ship. There's not a huge amount on the smaller ships, but on this one, just take care to catch all the parts around the main control turret. Just use a brush with a fine tip, thin down the paint and take your time. It should look a little like this when you're done. Next we take Agrax Earthshade wash and we'll wash it over all of those gold pipeworks to help dull down the gold and blend it in with the overall look of the ship. Whilst that's drying, we can take Seraphim Sepia and wash this over the gold on the crest on the bow of the ship. A sepia wash over the gold, especially with the tips being caught with the silver, gives a great overall gold metallic finish. Now on this larger ship we take Aethermatic blue and run it into the areas around the main star on the control deck. This is just to give the impression of a blue glow and it gives some focus to the area. This is completely optional, but I think it adds a little something. Once that's all dry, it should look like this. Lastly, we take iron hand steel and tidy up any areas that we went over with the red contrast paint or the snakebite leather. This just neatens up the whole effect, especially on the smaller ships, as any mistakes can really stand out at that scale. And that's it. The last thing to do is paint up your chosen weapons and generators, pop them in place, and you should have a battle ready fleet in no time. The beauty of these simple paint jobs is they're easy to follow, super fast to do, and when your fleet takes to the table, they look fantastic, all ready for war. If you found this helpful, why not consider subscribing to the channel for future painting and hobby content. Thanks for watching my video. I hope that you really enjoyed it, and if you did, why not consider clicking on the suggested video below to see more of the work that I've done. If you'd like to support the long-term sustainability of this channel, why not consider checking out my Patreon, where you can pledge and support from as little as $2 a month, and there is lots of different tiers and bonuses which will give you access to a private Discord server. It will give you free t-shirts, free mugs, a podcast every month, and a number of other things, including getting your name at the end of every video, like these awesome folks who already support me now.